Strength training is being promoted as a great way to build bone health, and it is. But there are some steps that we need to go through before we can start really lifting heavy and building the healthy bones that we want as we get later in life. So the things that we're going to be talking about: muscle activation, exercise technique, posture of the body. We need to be able to get these right before we can start running into a gym and lifting really heavy weights. And just as a quick introduction, how are bones remodeled? Well, essentially, it's done through load. The heavier the weight, the more micro injuries that happen to the bone, the more osteocytes, blasts and clasts are activated to be able to remodel the bone. So what we need is we need to use load as the stimulus for those 3 bone cells to work properly to clear and build the bones that we are wanting. But what we The weight is appropriate to the individual. So if you've never weight trained before, then whatever a heavy weight is for you. So I've got 2 20-kilo kettlebells here. So for someone, this could be the heaviest weight that they've ever lifted. For someone, it may be a very light weight for them to lift. So it depends on the condition of your bones with regards to what weight you should be lifting. Now, if you are having trouble understanding what weight to use, ask a question down in the comment section and I'll do my best to try and guide you. I won't be able to say use this weight or use that weight, but I'll certainly be able to guide you with regards to a weight that may be appropriate. And then it's up to you to make the decision for yourself as to where you start. So what we have to understand is that lighter loads will get just a light remodeling, heavier loads will get a heavier, faster remodeling. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to start at heavy loads at the start. We want to build from lighter loads all the way into heavier loads. So that is sort of a precursor to going into building the exercises. But the idea would be, with these next 5 steps that we're going to talk about, is that we use a light weight anyway. So we're not thinking about bone remodeling right at the start. We're going to think about that a bit further down the line as we've got these 5 steps in place. And step number 1 is posture. So it's making sure we get the body in the right position. So as you can see, I've got 2 kettlebells here, 20 kilos, so 40 kilos in all, and I've raised them up. So how you would perform this, you may need to raise them. It all depends on your hip range of movement. So what that means is if I come into this position and I stand over the weight, I want to go back into this position and I want to hold on to the weights here. I want to be able to maintain neutral posture through the spine. And the reason I want to be able to hold my neutral posture through the spine is because it's going to spread the load out. If I come into this position and I round, this is now going to concentrate load around my spine. That's going to put my spine at greater risk of injury. If I come into this position, I'm spreading it out around the torso, which is reducing the risk of injury to the spine. Now, again, it depends on the weight that one is lifting. If you're not used to lifting 40 kilos, I wouldn't recommend doing it, because even if you come into this position, you're putting your back at greater risk because your muscles aren't conditioned to it. So we need to get the appropriate weight first, which is why I introduced it in part number 1. So we come into this position and we get that neutral posture through the spine. We want to be able to keep the shins vertical. Now, the only time we would raise them up is if we come down into this position, so they're on the floor, so I've now got to get about 3 or 4 inches lower. So we come down, so if I get to here, I can hold them, but now I need to round my back to get all the way down. So what I've done is I've compromised my lower back to pick those weights up. So for me not to hurt myself or put myself at greater risk of injury, I lift them up. I can get down that far, that's not a problem. But as the example, I would raise them up. So what I can now do is get into that position, and now I can hold the weights as I want to. So point number 1 is the posture of the spine, so it spreads the load out around the spine, so I minimize the risk of injury. Number 2 is your ability to be able to do the hip hinge. So I've already done this in part number 1, but I didn't talk about it because I just wanted to talk about the torso. But now we've got the torso in the right position, it's now about the hip hinge. So we come into this position and we go back at the hips. So what I'm not doing when I go down, I'm not bending at the knees. My knees bend, but not because my knees need to bend. My knees bend because my hips go back. So my shins stay vertical, I push my hips back and my body comes over. That gets me in the position that I want to be able to lift. And then I basically just do the reverse as I come back up. So it's hip hinging, that helps us maintain this posture, it helps us maintain this posture. We're then able to hold on to the weight and then we're able to lift up. And then we hip hinge to get ourselves back down. So it's very important that we get this hip hinge, because what it's also going to be able to do is going to be able to get us to activate our glutes that much easier, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in part number 3. And part number 3 is all about muscle activation. I mentioned glute activation. So what we want to be able to do is when we come into this hip hinge, is we push the hips back, as we pick onto the weights, as we come up, we squeeze the glutes. So when we get to the top, we consciously squeeze the glute. Now there is some other muscle activation that we need. We need to muscle activation in the abdominals and in the lat. So what we do is we brace the abdominals so we get solid at the tummy, we go back at the hips, and then what we do is we push the shoulders down into the rib cage. We grab onto the weight and we squeeze the hips and come to the top. Then we go back down, again, keeping the tummy tight and the lats braced. But as you go back down, the glutes will deactivate because you're lengthening the joint. So that's part number 3, is making sure we get the muscle activation. But what we need to be able to do is do it consciously to start with. So when we come into this position, we come back, we hold, and then we squeeze up, and we consciously squeeze at the top. But along with that, we make sure we get the abdominals tight. Now, if that's a lot for us to take on mentally, what we can do is just focus on with a light weight. So I've halved my weight, so just the abdominals now. So I'm not worried about the glutes, I just want my abdominals to be tight. I'm not worried about my lat, I'm just worried about my abdominals being tight. So that would be part 1. Part 2 would be abdominals and glutes. Abdominals and glutes. And then what I can do is put lats in that as well. So I can go abdominals, lats, glutes. So all the way through that, I'm building it piece by piece. This is what we need to do strength training. As I've mentioned, this is what a lot of people just end up doing, is they go in, they lift heavy weights and they do themselves damage, so they then can't lift heavy weight. If you want to be remodeling bones, you've got to lift heavy loads. But we've got to lift heavy loads in the right way, which is why we're trying to build this. And again, if you've got any questions about technique, or if something's you've not quite understood, stick it down in the comment section below, and we will sort of try and clarify that as much as we can. Also, if you want to learn more, hit the link in the description, go through to my free newsletter where there's more tutorials like this, talking about strength training, talking about bone health, and how you can go about doing both of these, but in the right way, not just loading a bar up with as much weight as you can and just doing heavy weight. So we need to be able to do the exercises correctly. But what we'll do now is we'll move on to step number 4. Which is all about levers. Now, what's a lever? Well, a lever is my arm. So I have a long lever here. If I bring my arm down here, it's a slightly shorter lever because it's not the length from my shoulder to my arm, to my knuckle. It's now, that lever is a little bit shorter. It's because it's that distance there, which is now a little bit longer. Whereas I come down here, it's more in line. So if I have, this is a very short lever because it's only about 2 inches away from my body. But this is a long lever because it's about, I don't know, 2-3 feet from my body, or 2.5 feet from my body. So that's essentially what a lever is. So how we need to lift our weights, the lighter the weight, the longer the lever we can have. So the heavier weight, the shorter lever. So if we start with a heavy weight, let's just say 40 kilos, I'm going to stand right over the top of it. And I'm going to make the lever as short as possible. So I'm going to stand in here and have my hands right underneath my hips. Now if it's 20 kilos, which is half the weight, I can come into this position and I can lift it up with not a lot of difficulty. And again, I can put it down out there if I need to. So I'm sort of able to use a longer lever, but if with 2 of them, it's not going to happen. So with a heavier weight, we need to have a short lever, but it makes going into the position that I've talked about and activating the muscles that I've talked about a little bit easier, because we stand right over, we're more compact, and because the arms are right underneath, it's easier for me to engage my lats, tighten my tummy, and squeeze my glutes. So we need to think about levers, and we need to think about keeping them, the heavier the weight, the shorter they get, the lighter the weight, the longer they get. So we need to think about levers in that way, but when we are building strength, we can go heavier because we can shorten the lever. So if we use kettlebells, we can get a nice short lever, nice heavy weight, and we can lift it. So that's why it's much more advantageous. But what we need to be able to do, which is kind of the thread that's gone through all of this, is talk about using the appropriate weight at the appropriate time. And that's step number 5, is using the appropriate weight. So as I've mentioned through all of this, to start with, when we're going through getting all these points, don't worry about bone remodeling to start with. Just pick up a light weight and hone all these points. So make sure you're getting the posture of the torso. Make sure you're getting the hip hinge. Make sure you're lifting the weights if you need to, because if you haven't got the hip range of movement to get down, then you're going to round your back to get down. And that's going to cause you problems, which eventually you won't be able to lift heavy weights because your back will be giving you a problem all the time. So start with light weights, posture of the torso, hinge of the hip, activate the muscles, use the levers correctly. And then as time goes on, your muscles will also become conditioned, but your brain will become conditioned to the movement, and that will allow you to lift much heavier weights, which will then accelerate the bone remodeling and the bone health building elements of strength training. You will also get other benefits from strength training, but for right now we're just talking about bone health. So making sure we're getting the technique right, the muscle activation right, before we go into lifting heavy weights. And as I mentioned, if you've enjoyed the content, hit the like button. If you've got a question about anything that I've said, or want more detail on technique, leave it in the comment section below. If you want to watch more videos like this, hit the like and subscribe button, or just hit the link in the description and you'll go through to my free strength training newsletter anyway, which will talk more about this and how to do it.